Hello, my name is Alberto Garcia, and I'm the Academic Skills Librarian for Wolfson College. Thank you for joining me on this presentation of Academic Writing, an Overview. In this video, we'll have three objectives. First, is to learn about the different aspects of academic writing. Second, to learn about the different areas you should consider to position yourself as an academic writer. And third, know where to seek further assistance for academic writing support. Now, before we go into the subject a little bit more in depth, I think it's helpful to think about the process of writing. And from this picture, you can see it's not a linear process per se. As we look at the different areas, we can see that many of the academic skills we offer at Wolfson College resonate with the different areas of the process. For example, in the pre-writing stage, we have time management, critical evaluation, speed reading, and note making. And all of these skills kind of align with some of the activities you would be doing in the pre-writing stage. In this overview video on academic writing, we want to make some further inroads from the pre-writing stage into the drafting and editing areas by looking at things such as organization, language, and some proofreading techniques. So it's helpful then to think about academic writing. What is it? And some of the most common features of it are that it's planned and focused. It answers the question and it demonstrates an understanding of a subject. Academic writing is also structured. That means it's coherent, written in a logical order, and it brings together related points and material. For the most part, academic writing is also argumentative, and that means that it's built up by evidence and reasoning, either from your own thoughts or incorporating the ideas of others to help support you. And last, it's formal in tone and style. And that means it uses appropriate language and tenses. It's clear, concise, and balanced. Now, if you think about academic writing, it might be helpful to think of writing in three modes of thought. So the first would be writing as thinking. And this simply means as you write, you are thinking, and writing helps you to clarify the thought process. You are connecting ideas you gain from reading or researching, and at the same time trying to find your own voice. Another helpful way to think about writing is to think of it as a conversation. As emerging scholars, you want to view writing as an opportunity to participate in the ongoing scholarly dialogue with others in their field. At this level, you're being asked to make and defend arguments through your writing, and it's important to recognize how your arguments engage with and contribute to the existing scholarship in your field of study. Successfully entering the conversation requires you to have knowledge of expected conventions, such as those related to vocabulary choices or document organization. And last but not least, it's helpful to think of writing as a process. Writing is more than a product. It includes the note-making, reading, composition, revising, and proofreading that occurs to get to the final product. At this point, you'll realize that the research aspect of the project and the writing up of the project are not two separate things. Included in this is the process of your ideas developing as well. As you begin to position yourself as an academic writer, we'll consider 6 areas that are important. First will be audience, purpose and strategy, organization, the flow of your writing, style, and its presentation. In many cases, when we think about writing, it's helpful to have a person firmly in mind as you plan, compose, review, and edit your writing. Think about the manner in which your marker will read your work. While your marker will have more subject knowledge than you, the way they read your work is different than the way they would read the work of a researcher in their field. They will want to check that you've understood concept related to the subject matter, and the only way they can know this is if you make that clear in your writing. It might be helpful to think of your reader at this point as another student at a slightly more advanced level than you. And that means that it requires you to explain yourself so that they can see that you've properly understood what you're writing about. Some helpful questions to ask yourself. What does your audience need? What do they want? What do they value? What is most important to them? What are they least likely to care about? What kind of organization would best help your audience understand and appreciate your argument? What do you have to say, or what are you doing in your research that might surprise your audience? This takes us to the next area of purpose and strategy. So apart from the questions that we just finished asking about the audience, you'll also want to ask yourself, what do you want your reader to gain from reading your work? This can be a bit of reflective practice as you are thinking about your work, and attempting to answer this question may help you focus on the arguments or points that you're trying to make in your essay. This now takes us to the issue of organization. Now, it's important to note that there isn't a magic organization that's going to fit every writing project across all the disciplines. How you organize your writing will depend in part by your audience and the purpose you're writing for. But in general, readers expect that academic writing will present an argument in a logical and consistent manner across the entire project. On a global scale, this might look at an undergraduate research project or a supervision as a whole. On a local level, this type of organization would look at, for example, a section of a project or a paragraph, perhaps even a sentence. One of the first things that determines how we are going to organize our writing is by looking at the question you've been given and decide how you're going to answer it. One of the biggest challenges students face in both assignments and exams is not that they can't write, but rather understanding the question that is being asked. Some things to keep in mind when you get an essay question. First, spend time thinking about it before you begin to do anything else. Really break it down, locating the keywords that are present in the question. Identify the topics that you need to focus on, and be aware that sometimes the question might contain multiple topics. Alternatively, it may be an open-ended question, so then you'll need to define the parameters or scope of your response. Also take note if you are being asked to use any specific sources, materials, or theories. Sometimes this may be described in the question itself, or you may be expected to work from a reading list. Lastly, think about what you are being asked to do. Identify the verb or the direction word in your question, such as compare, describe, contrast, evaluate, explain, examine, summarize, or analyze. If you aren't sure what they mean, download a list of instruction words and their definitions in the Try It Out section of this LibGuide. Additionally, try breaking down the question into sub-questions. This will focus your reading and help to formulate the structure of your essay. A helpful metaphor to keep in mind when thinking about the structure and organization of your paper is that of the hourglass. So you'll see from the picture on this slide, the hourglass begins wide at the top and then funnels downward, and then on the opposite side begins to expand wider again. In many ways, the movement or shape of the hourglass recreates the general shape of how an academic essay, through its organization, leads the reader through the paper. You have an introduction that often begins by setting the context of the paper and begins to focus in as it develops to the thesis statement of the essay. Then you have the body paragraphs of a work, which are often called the building blocks of your argument, which function as Inger Mewburn, the thesis whisperer, calls them chunks of thinking. It is here where your writing really focuses in on its argument, and essentially the paragraphs are meant to help the reader see the development of your argument in a logical, structured manner. The conclusion of your work then begins this process of widening out again by returning your reader to the central topics you discussed in your paper. Looking a little more closely at introductions, there are three key moves that should happen in an introduction. The first is that it should provide relevant background. Now, this doesn't mean a genealogy of ideas from the beginning of recorded history, but rather a soundbite that helps you to orient the reader to the general topic of your paper. This should be followed by the second move, which is to give the summary of the particular problem you wish to address, then followed by your response to the problem, which is basically your statement of your argument in miniature. You may be familiar with this as the thesis statement of your argument. Other important characteristics of a strong introduction involve giving a brief synopsis of the relevant literature, indicating a problem, controversy, or knowledge gap in the field of study, establishing the desirability of the research, listing the research questions or hypotheses, explaining the significance or value of the study, or perhaps defining certain key terms. Paragraphs, as I mentioned earlier, are meant to help your reader follow your argument in a clear and logical way. Now, one phrase I always say when I talk about the importance of thesis statements, introductions, and topic sentences in paragraphs is that they're not mystery novels. You shouldn't leave the reader ever wondering, why am I reading this paper, or why am I reading this paragraph? In academic writing, you want to allow the reader to know why they're reading an essay or the paragraphs up front so that they can then concentrate more exclusively on your arguments. You might be familiar with some of these acronyms for models such as TEAL, which is topic, evidence, evaluate, link, or PEAL, point, evidence, exploration, link. There's TEXes, topic, sentence, explanation, example, analysis, summary, or PI, which is point, information, explanation. Now, while academic paragraphs are more sophisticated than these acronyms and the models, they are helpful in giving a clue of the type of rhetorical moves you should be doing in your paragraphs. Almost all of these models provide that topic sentence to let your reader know what the paragraph is about, explaining the step your argument is making in your own words, giving evidence that shows your point isn't just your opinion, using or explaining that evidence in conjunction with other pieces you may have introduced, or how is it impacted by analysis, theory, or context, and last but not least, signal what's coming next for the reader. And last but not least, some of the key elements in the conclusion is that it returns to questions and problems that have been outlined in the introduction of your paper. It revisits your argument and enables your reader to check that you did what you promised to do. It highlights any limitations to your analysis, and it can broaden out to connect your answers to the bigger picture of the topic. Moving on to the next area that you need to consider as an academic writer, I want to talk a bit about flow in writing. If you've ever received feedback on your writing with comments such as, a bit confusing here, or this section is a bit choppy, then your reader is making a reference to the flow of your paper. In writing, flow usually refers to how easily a reader can get into the text. That is to say, how easily the reader moves past the text and into a reading experience where they are connecting with the ideas presented within your work. One scholar of writing has said that reading a good academic work is like going down a slide. You go up the height of the slide without putting in too much effort, and when you go down the slide, you should want to go back again and do it again. One way to help your reader follow the flow of your writing is by clearly signposting when you're moving from one topic to another. For help on this, the Manchester Academic Phrasebook is an excellent resource that you can find a link to in the external writing support section of this academic writing LibGuide. Another helpful way to think about the flow of your writing is by thinking of what Inger Mewburn, again the thesis whisperer, calls themes and rhemes. For Mewburn, the theme is everything in the first part of the sentence, or the first clause, usually up to the first verb. The rest of the sentence is the rheme. It doesn't have a specific meaning, it just stands in to mean the rest of the sentence. The way themes and rhemes work is the rheme must relate to the theme in some way, adding information, clarification, or a counterpoint. So to create a smooth flowing text, the next sentence should link to the theme or rheme of the previous sentence. Now let's see an example of flow using Mewburn's themes and rhemes. Take a moment to read through this selection with the question in mind: how well does this text flow? If you would like, you can pause the video here before I point out some features of this selection. Okay, so how well does this text flow? Well, one thing we can notice is that all these sentences fit together because they are building on the theme of whinging by adding variations on the theme and introducing new information. Yet, what are some of the problems of a text like this? Because of the introduction of new information, the reader has to do some work to create the meaning of what the text is trying to say. There are pivot points that don't make the reading so smooth, and this becomes more apparent when we read the next selection. Now, take a few moments to read this example, and if you need, you can go back to the previous example to compare the two texts. Okay, so one thing that becomes apparent is how the rheme of the sentence, as Mewburn calls it, becomes the theme of the next sentence in this example. By doing this, the writing stays focused, and from the reader's perspective, it's a lot easier to follow the flow of ideas. Now, when we're thinking about style, we are thinking here essentially about some of the smallest units of your writing, that is, at the level of a sentence. Here we want to pay close attention to the way words convey meaning in a sentence, and for this we have to think about the structure of a sentence. We can go back to some of the basic elements such as subject and verbs and the way clauses or sections of a sentence work to create a clear unit of meaning. And some things that can make sentences difficult to read are run-on sentences, where there are too many sections in a single sentence. Also, confusing or unclear subjects can make it more difficult for your reader to understand what you're trying to say. That being said, spell checkers and grammar checkers can help alleviate some of these pressures. However, it's important to note that they cannot help very much when it comes to academic stylistic suggestions, and for this, it will be helpful for you to familiarize yourself with the style conventions of your discipline. In thinking about word choice, another helpful thing to keep in mind is to consider using Latinate versions of words as opposed to their more colloquial forms. For example, instead of asks around, you might use inquire, or you should say investigates instead of checks it out. Consider or examine versus thinks about. Paying attention to your sentence structure and your word choice can ultimately help make your writing clear for your reader. And this is a good thing because it allows your reader to concentrate on your arguments rather than trying to make sense of the words that you are using. Here, I would like to make a short note on the use of jargon in academic writing. There is a myth that academic writing should be purposefully and unnecessarily complex in its structure and filled with jargon to be more academic. For example, if you would like, pause the video here and take a few moments to read the selection. Try to understand what the writer is trying to say with these sentences. When you're ready, you can press play to continue. So, how did you do? As you can see, there are a lot of points in this selection that are quite difficult to make sense of. I've highlighted some sections I think are a bit difficult to follow. Did they match with some of the ones that you picked out? What this example shows is that if the reader is struggling to decipher large portions of your text because of your word choice, rather than reading to understand the argument, then you risk the reader or marker deciding the work is not written well, no matter how intellectually novel your argument may be. Now, while I'm certainly not saying that you should never use the specialized terminology of your discipline, and indeed, sometimes it's necessary to demonstrate your knowledge acquisition to the academic community you belong to, there is a growing movement to make your research understandable to specialists and non-specialists alike. And this may be something to keep in mind when you are writing. Be clear in your writing, not purposefully obscure. The last area to focus on is the presentation of your work. With such an emphasis on ideas and arguments, it may be easy to fall into the trap that these are the only things that matter, no? Now, while ideas and arguments are certainly important, submitting a well-proofread work demonstrates a level of care with your own work for the reader. Here, I want to outline briefly the difference between revising and proofreading because they are sometimes used synonymously, even though they're different. Revision refers to global level aspects of your work, such as changing its structure to better support your argument, or even deciding to delete certain sections of your work in order to help the flow of your project. Proofreading, on the other hand, deals with the surface level details, such as being aware for errors in punctuation or misspellings. One helpful way to think about this difference is revising is like deciding whether you should build a new wall in your house or apartment, or perhaps even break down a wall so that you have more open space. Proofreading is like deciding which color you will paint the walls after you finish the project. This also points to another important element. Don't revise and proofread at the same time. Focus on one or the other in order to do the best job with each process. On this slide, I've listed some proofreading techniques that may be helpful when you proofread your own work. Many of these techniques emphasize enlisting the help of different senses to help you engage your work in a different manner than reading silently on a screen. While there is an emphasis on reading from a printed copy, if you decide to read from an electronic copy, there are still ways to help erode the mental image you have of your own work and help you approach it with a fresh perspective. Last but not least, ask a friend or colleague to read your work for you. Having a completely different perspective can highlight areas you might not have caught with your own reading of your work. I hope you've enjoyed this brief overview of some of the characteristics of strong academic writing. And if you need further support, we have a variety of options you have access to at Wolfson College. We have the Wolfson College Writing Consultants, who offer one-to-one writing consultations for undergraduates and MPhil students throughout the term. You can always book a one-to-one academic skills session with Laura or myself to support you in other relevant skills necessary for the writing process. At Wolfson, we also have access to a Royal Literary Fund Fellow who can provide one-to-one support as well, with availability throughout the term. And if you struggle to find some structured time, you can always join us for a Right Here, Right Now session where you can write and study with us other Wolfson students. Links to all these services are available in the Wolfson and Cambridge University support for writing section on this page. Again, thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with me. There's my email on this slide. And I look forward to see you in any workshops this term.